Isle of Dogs. Actually, the island is a large loop in the Thames. A tightly clustered jumble of factories, warehouses, and docks, which grew up haphazardly over the centuries along the banks of the river. The docks, with their spidery loading cranes, provide most of the jobs for the 12,000 people who live on the island. They also provide the island's traditions. The tradition of the stevedore, the bargeman, the dock worker. Jim Griggs is a crane operator on the West India docks. Mr. Griggs, how long have you been working on the West India docks?
Well, I've been in dock ever since I was 15. My father, he worked in a dock. Father before that, I believe. And in all, I suppose, they lived on the island for about 130 years, I suppose. It goes back, you know, the generations, right? The same applies to most of the blokes here.
The tradition of the inherited job, passed down from father to son, began with the medieval craft guilds. Today, it's a firm regulation protecting the men against competition by outsiders. Although the dock workers are well paid by British standards, employment goes up and down with the fluctuations in British foreign trade, which in recent years has been in a chronic crisis. The export problem is familiar to these men. They see it every day. Manufactured goods must be sold and shipped abroad to pay for food and raw materials, which Britain must import because she has so little of her own. When exports fall behind imports by too wide a margin, the nation faces bankruptcy. And they've been close to it several times in the years since they gave up the empire. One of the biggest problems is food. The British must import 50%, more than any other nation. Much of it is unloaded at the Isle of Dogs. The streets of the island are typical of Britain's older industrial districts. Because the men like to live near their work, drab warehouses are close to row after row of equally drab little homes. Many families have lived on the same street for generations. People like Mrs. Kressel, a former mayor of the island. At 78, Mrs. Kressel is still active in civic affairs, a spokesman for the islanders. Her grocer, Mr. Hart, has an old-fashioned shop, but modern ideas. Mrs. Kressel, the people on the island seem to have resisted change. They live more or less as they did years ago. Why is that? Is there some special reason?
Well, I think it's because this island is more like a country village. You know, everybody helps one another and everybody seems to know one another's business, and I think that's one of the reasons it's not changed such a lot. And there's still a great many island people still living here. They won't go anywhere else to live.
Yes, but don't you think yourself, Mrs. Kressel, it's something to do with the surroundings, the work? Look, a dockie. He hands down his job to his son, doesn't he?
Yes.
Well, that means that nobody else can come in, can they?
No.
Well, that's going to keep people out, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, well now, you take it from our angle. We're isolated. The work is local, it's dock work, which also isolates the individuals that work in the dock. It's another closed society.
Mr. Hart, Mrs. Kressel, this closed society that's based on working-class customs, is it changing at all?
Well, I should say here on this island we're all working class.
You yourself?
Me myself, yes, very much so.
I'm no class. I don't think there's such a thing as class bar in this country today.
Well, when do you think these barriers started to break down, Mr. Hart?
They started to break down during the war, at the outbreak of the war, when we were all in trouble. When we sort of more or less mixed and started to mix. Surely you remember when this island was cut off.
Yes, I do.
That was the first Saturday, if you remember.
Yes, I remember. We used to see them come when they used to come over the south coast. We could see them coming over and count them.
About 5 minutes afterwards, in the distance you'd hear the warble, gradually getting nearer and nearer and nearer, and all of a sudden the guns would open up before you get anywhere. You could hear the old boom boom in the distance. I thought, this is it, this place is a fire. Well, a fire, and gradually getting worse. The rum key was burning, the tobacco warehouse was alight, boats caught fire. Well, it was just chaotic.
Well, I think it was like hell upon earth. But it was really a terror. People were really terrified.
Robert Strong is the Presbyterian minister on the island. For him and his wife, music is an outlet in a hard and unrewarding routine. Their income is very small. Culturally, the island is a desert. No theater, no motion pictures, no music other than their own, and few books. Mr. Strong, what is the position of the church on the Isle of Dogs? Are you satisfied with the way your people respond to religion?
Well, yes, when you say my people, of course, that's a very small proportion of the population. There are only 200 practicing Christians of all denominations out of a population of about 12,000, and that is fairly typical of this kind of area, this kind of densely urbanized district. It's typical of the whole country. The church has never had much of an impact on this kind of society.
Because the dockers, bargemen, and laborers won't come to him, Mr. Strong goes to them at the docks and factories. He has little hope of making converts. Their religious apathy is another tradition of Britain's working people.
I think a great many spiritual values have gone by the board, and nothing has come to take their place. People tend to live in a kind of vacuum spiritually, and that's bound to have an effect on both their material and mental existence.
Strong accepts their attitude and tries to help with their material problems. Problems of housing. Entire streets were bombed out during the war. New homes are under construction, but people marry and have children. The population rises as fast as the buildings. Problems of youth.
We have what we call a street corner with a roof on. They come on a Thursday evening and they make the best of that evening for themselves. Most of the kids have plenty of intelligence, and I think given a different environment, a different home background and so on, many of them could make much more of themselves than they do.
These youngsters have little ambition. Their only interest is dancing.
I can't believe like this. We two were meant to be.
Juvenile delinquency has increased, although not as much as elsewhere. What do the young people think about it?
It's not everybody, it's only a certain few that you get to this sort of thing. I mean, they go around smashing telephone booths, they rip cinema seats, they get on buses, they sort of abuse people, they make noises, and in general they make themselves a foul nuisance.
It's boredom most of the time. They do something to get into the headlines, get into publicity.
Well, if you mean fights, we don't get no fights down here. Not now. A little while ago, you used to get quite a few, but not now. It's just dropped off.
They're lazy. In one respect, they've got nothing to do. They think that people owe them something.
Eat, drink and be merry, that's it, for tomorrow we die.
Instead of sort of interesting themselves in a sport of some sort or the other, they don't. Maybe I think because they're too idle or lazy, or they just don't want to know. I prefer sculling. I mean, I train every night of the week, so I mean, dragging the streets doesn't interest me.
sports like sculling, work, and perhaps even conduct are linked with tradition in young men like George Cole.
Hi, George. How far you been this morning?
About a mile and a half.
What are you training for now?
Dog it this time, yes.
George, you're called a freeman of the river. What does that mean?
Well, a freeman of the river means you're a waterman and a lighterman. And when you're first apprenticed, you go to Waterman's Hall and you go before a board of masters. Waterman's Hall is a very old place. It must go back about 400 years. And the doggett is one of the traditions as well.
The doggett race has been held annually on the Thames since the year 1715. The dock workers are a frequent target of criticism. They have a recent history of unofficial wildcat strikes, a long heritage of aggressive trade unionism, and memories of hard times in the past. What do they say about questions of export and import? This is Union leader Jim Coughlin.
I worry about it very much because importing, if we don't import, we starve. If we don't export, we go bankrupt.
Don't forget, we've got quite a lot to compete with these continental ports. They've advanced quite a lot quicker than the British ports have. We've still got the same conditions that my grandfather had.
Our port of London is still the antiquated thing that was used to be before the war, and it can only handle the same volume of trade that was used to handling before the war.
What about the unofficial strikes, Mr. Coughlin? Some people blame the workers. What do you think?
I would say there are many causes, but the basic one is a psychological one, and it is fear of unemployment, of the insecurity of the job. It manifests itself in everything that the docker does.
The constant attack is cut labor to cut costs, increase profits with none of the distribution of the profit coming back to the worker. These continued attacks by employers bring home a fear to the worker, to the docker, that he's going to go back to the days that used to exist pre-war. And this does bring along, as I stated before, the reasons for unofficial strikes.
The children of the island learn early about ships, strikes, docks, and unemployment. They grow up under the shadow of these things.
Look, see it over there? Yeah. Oh, and look at that big boat. Shall I draw that? Yes, go on then. Hey, look at that big ship going past. Isn't it big? Pulling it along. Hey, look at them big cranes over there. Aren't they big? Why don't you draw that big ship? I think I will. Well, go on then. But I'll draw the cranes.
Some primary schools on the island are old, but well maintained. The children in their early years are permitted freedom and fun. They paint the life they see around them, reacting with vivid colors and excitement to a world of docks and ships. At this age, they have imagination and self-expression.
Yellow and do all that. Where? I'm using orange to do this boat. Then after I'm going to do the background. I'm not going to do a seagull and this.
But the carefree days don't last long. As they grow older, they become less imaginative and more sober.
The grocery saved 240 eggs.
Perhaps that's because for them, like most other British children, the first great decision of their lives comes at age 11, when they take the so-called 11+ examination. Critics say this test has its roots deep in the heritage of British education, which once was almost exclusively for the children of the rich and well-born. It tends, they claim, to continue that tradition.
Oh, good morning. How did the children get on with that arithmetic test then?
That's more or less what I expected.
Oh.
This is Mr. Taylor, headmaster of the Harbinger Primary School. Mr. Taylor, would you explain the 11+ examination?
Yes. The 11+ is an examination in arithmetic and English, and in addition to that, there's a test called the General Intelligence Test. This consists of a lot of trick questions may involve English or it may involve arithmetic. That's exactly what the 11+ examination is. And from the results of this, children are selected for different forms of education after the age of 11.
I felt a feeling of disappointment. I was really disappointed. For the next few years, and indeed immediately afterwards, I had a sense of being a reject.
If you pass, you're one of the very high scholars, and if you don't pass, you're never spoken to again. You're just left on the wayside to fight for yourself.
I've got a mate who passed the 11+, and he wishes he never done it now because there's a lot of homework and he don't have much time for himself. I wouldn't have liked to pass it myself.
But discontent sometimes leads to action. Some people do leave the island. Mostly they're young, with growing families, like Dennis and Angie French. The Frenches have decided to break with the past and take part in Britain's newest social experiment.
Here, shall I go up to the front?
Yeah, I think so.
The Frenches are moving to the new town of Stevenage, and a kind of life which may eventually wipe out the traditional Britain of the past.